Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. We're gonna do a podcast episode I've been meaning to do, to be honest, for a while now. I've helped so many clients with this that I kind of thought I did an episode at one point, but then I couldn't really find it. So here we are. We're gonna do an episode on 5 things that I would be doing if I were struggling to get my period back and had hypothalamic amenorrhea. Now, to kind of define HA or hypothalamic amenorrhea, which I'm going to call HA because it's a mouthful, is that our period can go missing for a lot of reasons, medically, physiologically. The most common reason I see in practice working with like my type of clientele, which are super active individuals who are really high achieving, who are like recreational athletes for the most part, is that they are losing their periods due to hypothalamic amenorrhea. Now, again, there's a lot of other medical reasons why this can happen. And maybe you're here because you have that diagnosis, or you think you have that diagnosis, or your period's missing and you're just kind of, diving in to learn about some reasons why that can happen. So this could be like the status quo for you, where you're just like, yeah, I haven't had a period in a long time. It could be that you're coming off of hormonal birth control, like IUDs or the pill, patches, implants, etc., and you just haven't gotten your period back yet, which can be HA. A lot of the times when this happens, it's because had you not been on the pill, you wouldn't have had your period. You just didn't know that would be the case because you were taking the pill, which makes you get a bleed, which is simulates a period, but it's not actually a period. So then when you get off the pill and that's no longer happening, you're just not getting a period. And that's one reason why birth control can mask HA. And we need to be really cognizant of making sure we are fueling adequately and healthy and using like data other than our period when we are on hormonal birth control to assess. So again, there can be a lot of reasons why this happens, and you could be coming from probably a couple different places listening to this episode. Maybe you've been missing a period for months, years, or maybe you just missed one last month and you're here. Typically, once we have missed, 2 or 3 periods in a row, that is considered like hypothalamic amenorrhea. Clinically, it's significant. It's a problem. It's something we want to address. I kind of say if we're missing our period at all, even for the first month, like that's the writing on the wall that we really want to pay attention to before it becomes a more significant problem, because that often does come with more significant health issues as well. So anyway, let's just dive right in. So obviously this is not individualized medical advice or a replacement for medical advice. It's a podcast episode. It's meant for educational purposes only. And I will give you some resources if you need extra support towards the end. And my hope is that it prompts maybe some spark of conversations you want to have with your own providers to learn and get somewhere when you're working on this goal. So number one, and again, these are in no particular order, but I would start making sure I'm incorporating, if I'm not already, whole fat foods. So avocados, olive oil, salmon, nuts, peanut butter. We don't want to incorporate like PB2 or powdered peanut butter or low fat peanut butter. We don't want to incorporate, like I can't believe it's not butter or low fat sprays in lieu of actual oils. We don't want to incorporate things that aren't nuts because we're afraid to eat fat from nuts or calories. We don't want to do low fat dairy. We want to incorporate whole fat dairy. That's something that can be extremely beneficial. If you really hate whole fat dairy, then maybe you're incorporating 2%. But my point is we need fat to build hormones, and we need sex hormones to get our period back. And we need sex hormones to also have a healthy muscle tone, healthy heart function, healthy reproductive function, obviously, and healthy bone density. Estradiol in particular plays a really big role, which is a sex hormone, not only in our baby making capabilities, but also our ability to have muscle mass, to be strong, to have a libido, to sleep at night, to body temperature regulate, and also to lay down new bone. So this should matter to you. So incorporating fat at meals and snacks is really important because hormones are made from fat and cholesterol. They're made from fatty acids. So we need that in our diet. That's not something we should be restricting. And sometimes, like, this is happening because maybe you are restricting intentionally, or it's coming from a background of disordered eating or low energy availability. Or maybe you just didn't know and you're like, oh, I just like don't really have a lot of fat in my diet, but it wasn't really on purpose. So I will fix that. Um, that's number one, because that's a huge building block that we need to make hormones, and we need hormones to have a period. And we need hormones to have a period where we're also ovulating. I'll get to that in a second. Number two, we want to increase carbohydrate intake. We probably want it to be at least 5 grams per kilogram per day, if not more, especially if you have been really low carb in the past. Again, whether it's intentional or unintentional. Basically, the carbohydrate recommendations that are evidence-based that I'm just going to read for you are if you're exercising for less than an hour, pretty low intensity, so like walking, yoga, maybe light bike riding, like lower heart rate stuff. We want between 3 and 5 grams per kilogram of body weight. And to kind of just do a case study for a 150-pound person, that is between 200 and 340 grams of carbohydrate. And I mean, most of you listening probably don't even fall into this category because you're exercising more than that. And I know a lot of people tend to habitually eat somewhere in that range. So a lot of people are under fueling, again, whether it's intentional or not. So we probably need to eat more than that and really prioritize carbohydrates and scaling that up. If you're exercising about an hour a day, or you have like higher intensity exercise that's around an hour a day, like running, that's about 5 to 7 grams per kilogram per day. If you're exercising for 1 to 3 hours per day, that's about 6 to 10 grams per kilogram needed per day. And if you've got 4+ hours of exercise or manual labor or a combo of the two per day, that's between 8 and 12 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. That also would apply to something like carb loading for a marathon. So a lot of people need more than what they're eating when it comes to carbohydrates. And if your period's missing, we need the body's main energy source, which is carbohydrates, in order to make hormones and also in order to feel safe enough to ovulate and get a period, to grow tissue in the uterus, to either host a baby or shed in the form of a period, no matter what your goals are. And keep in mind, if you've been under fueling for a long time, it's not always enough to just say, oh, I'm going to look at these guidelines and pick the range that matches my activity level now, because we're not accounting for the fact that we have a big hole to fill, that we have a big gap that we need to fill. And that can be really hard because that means we're probably going to need to overshoot what, our on paper calculated goal might be, or decrease our physical activity, really both. But I'll talk about that in a second because physical activity is incredibly nuanced when it comes to getting your period back. And to kind of go off of 1 and 2, this is not number 3, but I do notice in my practice, a lot of people potentially need to relax on the protein intake in order to get more fat and carbohydrates in their diet. Protein's super filling, and sometimes with bodybuilding or social media, nutrition, there's a really big emphasis on protein, especially like 1 gram per pound. This is not scientific at all. Like, I don't know where this come from, but that's too much protein for a lot of people. So we probably need to relax a little bit on protein in order to make carbs and fat happen. So that might be helpful too, to reframe. So number 3, fueling pre, post, and during all exercise. If you're running, walking, yogaing, strengthening, cross training, hiking, whatever it is you're doing, taking the dog for a walk, you gotta be eating before and after. These are basic sports nutrition principles that even apply if you do have a period, or if you're a guy or, someone who doesn't get a period. And we really want to make sure we're fueling. And I would kind of add an asterisk to this. We need to eat something within 30 minutes of waking up in the morning. No skipping breakfast, no intermittent fasting. None of that's going to help your body feel safe enough to produce sex hormones or give it the materials it needs to properly cycle. So highly recommend eating within 30 minutes of waking up, eating every 2 to 4 hours throughout the day after that, incorporating fat and carbs, maybe relaxing a little bit on protein, still including it, but not like forcing it down your throat because that's not going to help you make hormones. And fueling before and after all exercise. And I also say during, because if you're someone where number 4, we're going to talk about reducing physical activity. If you're someone who's like, I really don't want to do that, or I want to try to not do that at first, if you're able to fuel during all of your exercise, that can really help your body like replete while it's depleting and get you a little bit ahead. Because, if you're, running like 5 miles or 3 miles or something where you're like, I don't need to fuel, like that's not a long run for me. It's probably only going to help you fill that gap we were talking about you potentially having. It's only going to help. So why not do it? And if you have like a really big complex around not wanting to do this, then I would say we need to reevaluate the relationship with exercise and food. And that's probably one of the root causes of why the period is not coming back and why we're not able to implement the things we need to implement in order to help it come back. And this is going to be more of a maybe like psychological support. Dietitian support can be super helpful. We can kind of say, this is what you need to do, and this is how you can do it. But if you're having a really hard time implementing that because of like psychological barriers, and again, I've been there, I understand. I'm not judging you, I'm just pointing it out. The help of a therapist who understands eating disorders, who understands athletes, I've had so many of them on the show, might be the best solution to kind of help support you through that. Because if you can remove those barriers and then you listen to a free podcast episode like this and you're like, oh, I know what to do and I can just go do it, that's really helpful. So consider fueling during your exercise, even some of the shorter stuff to kind of like catch up a little bit. Number 4, consider reducing your physical activity. This is not, people have like really charged opinions on this in the period recovery space. This is super nuanced. It's not necessary for everyone to stop or reduce exercise in order to get their period back. What we're typically looking at is a math equation. If you think of a bathtub, your kind of calorie or energy intake, using those words interchangeably, is going to be the water in the bathtub. And the drain is going to be your physical activity, your stress levels, basically things that are costing you that energy that you're putting into the tub. And if you think of like the water level needing to be at a certain point to get your period back and keep getting it consistently, sometimes if that drain is just really wide open and we know we're supposed to eat more, so we start to put more, water in the tank. We're putting more water in the tank, but that drain's still so open that our water level can't really increase because of math. It's not getting to the level it needs to get to or staying there. Then that could be a case where we're going to get to our goals a lot faster, even though it's scarier sometimes if we just reduce exercise. We close the drain a little bit or even completely for some people. Then it's like, okay, we put water in the tub, tub fills, boom. We can start to strategically open the drain back up again, i.e. incorporate exercise. And we have an easier time keeping the water level because we're more accustomed to eating this much. It's easier for us. And the math equation happens a little bit easier. Now, there's also a genetic component to this tub, okay? To kind of keep going with this metaphor, there's a genetic component in terms of like where that notch is in the side, in terms of like where you're going to get your period back, what water level has to happen for you to get your period back. I have helped clients right now. I would say I'm pretty confident I have almost, if not a 100% success rate in helping clients get their periods back. And that is hundreds of people over the years. It really is simple. Even in the more complex cases, it's something that is my bread and butter, me and Erica both. So we really love helping people with this. In my experience with people, very few have had to stop exercise completely in order to get their period back. I've had some people choose to do that and it happens very quickly. I've had some people kind of choose to say, I'm just going to keep exercising at my normal amount and try all these other things. And if that's not still working in a couple months, then maybe I'll reduce my exercise. And then if that's not working in a couple months, maybe I'll reduce it more or I'll stop altogether. And I've had clients get their periods back in the middle of marathon training. I've had clients get their periods back while training for an Ironman. I've also had clients get their periods back after trying to maintain a very reasonable activity level of like 3 30-minute runs per week. And their body was like, no, you got to stop. You got to stop running completely before I give you anything back. And then it does come back and then they can reincorporate running successfully. And everything in between. So again, there's also a lot of external factors that are going to affect your hormones and your cycle, and that is stress. Exercise is a stressor. Being underfueled is a stressor. Those are two of the things that are in my expertise to help you with. But psychological stress is also a stressor. If you've got mental health conditions or symptoms, that's a stressor. If you've got a really crazy job or a really hard home life or living situation or toxic relationships, a toxic job, things that just aren't good for you, or you're just really stressed and worn out, that's also not good for your cycle. So it's not always just nutrition and exercise, but they are usually two of the most important pillars. So all this to say, do you have to stop exercise? Not necessarily. Some people do. Some people are more sensitive to this than others. And since you're all athletes listening to this, I really encourage you to take a look at your relationship with exercise and kind of understand where you're coming from if there is hesitancy to not wanting to stop. I think it's totally normal to miss exercise, to not want to stop what you're doing if you love it. If it's like, it's my favorite thing ever, why would I stop? I don't want to stop. That's a bummer. That's normal. Okay, that's totally understandable. If there is kind of like a, what if I gain weight? What if I become less of an athlete? What if my performance all goes to shit in the future? Pardon my swearing. What if I become less worthy? What if I can't manage my mental health? If some of those questions are coming up, kind of discerning your relationship with exercise and assessing that would be, again, more kind of like ammunition, if you will, to maybe seek out that mental health support, because that's probably going to be super helpful for you and again, get you to your goals faster. So consider at least reducing it to help the bathtub math work out. If you're doing, 1 or 2 speed workouts a week and easy mileage, maybe consider just all easy mileage for a couple months or even a month to see how it goes. If you currently just do, easy mileage, maybe consider reducing it by like 20% again for a month, maybe 2 or 3. A lot of the times our changes that we make now affect us 3 cycles down the road because it takes that long for a follicle to mature, to release an egg, to ovulate, to therefore get a period. So it's not always, if I just, if I skip a speed workout this week, maybe I'll get my period back. No, it's probably going to have to be a little bit more consistent than that. Certainly is a drop in the bucket. You tighten the drain for like a second and then you opened it back up. But again, consider maybe taking a step down. You don't necessarily have to go from all to nothing unless you want to. And I will say that will probably work the fastest, but also be the most potentially traumatizing for a lot of athletes. But I digress. It's an option, but maybe just consider, how can I reduce this a little bit? How can I rest a little bit more? And I bet too, you'll find your spark comes back pretty quickly. Number 5 is blood work. And just a physical assessment in general. So if you feel like you've really tried all these things and you're like, dang, it's just like is not working. I'm barely exercising. I'm eating so many carbs and so much fat. I'm being super intentional about this. I've done the calculations. I'm sleeping good. I'm not that stressed and like what gives. It's definitely worth doing some blood work. It's definitely worth, having a physical assessment. If you lose your period at all, it's worth having a physical assessment. Um, Blood work, again, I would recommend the blood work. In my blood work podcast episode that I have. It's from 2025 in the fall. If you want to scroll back and check it out, it's under is serum calcium indicative of bone health and lab work. I recommend yearly for runners. Everything in there you'd probably want to have done. Also, to add to that, female sex hormones might be helpful to check in with as well, like estradiol, progesterone, FSH, LH, and prolactin, because these can kind of indicate is your body making hormones? Like, is it close to ovulating and getting a period? Is there another medical factor potentially at play? Like if your, prolactin levels are elevated, that's going to inhibit other sex hormone production. Testosterone as well is another one that you can measure. And again, a conversation with your doctor should help them order these for you, or I can order these things for you as well if you are a client of mine. A physical workup. This can rule out like pituitary issues and other potential causes of a missing period, like PCOS. Again, lots of reasons that can go into this, but for a lot of people in my audience, they're often misdiagnosed and it's hypothalamic amenorrhea, but they're maybe diagnosed with PCOS or just like, I don't know, there's still some crazy messaging going around saying if you don't have a period, it just means you're super healthy and fit because you run so much. And that's not true. It's also not true that if you go on birth control, it'll help you get a period back or help your bone health. That is not true. So if that's something that you've been told, not true. We really should be getting our period back. And there are other hormone therapies that can help protect your bone health, but they're typically not hormonal birth control. So I would have a conversation with your provider about that. From a lab work perspective, know that sometimes a issue I often run into with my type of clientele is that if they're getting their lab work done, just like at their annual physical, they're often measuring like cholesterol, fasting glucose. And a lot of the times, if these things are quote unquote within range or even on the lower side, they're praised for that. And if you have cholesterol below 150, your total cholesterol, that's a red flag when it comes to hormone production. That can be a sign that we're going to be struggling with some hormone production because we do not have the backbone of hormones in order to properly produce them, which is cholesterol. So that's something to consider and push back on. Same thing with blood sugar. If your blood sugar is too low, that's not good for your body. It's not going to give your body the safety signals it needs in order to produce sex hormones. So I do see a lot of people are like praised for that. And it's something that, again, I kind of raise an eyebrow at. And I'm like, oh, maybe that's a contributing factor to this. And the writing's on the wall. If you also have several nutrient deficiencies, like you've got low vitamin D, low ferritin, low B12, or you're on the low end of normal of one or several of those things, again, that's probably a sign that we really need to be reconsidering our fueling strategy because we're not eating enough. We're not eating enough nutrients and we're not eating enough to properly absorb nutrients, even if we maybe are supplementing them. And those deficiencies are, again, not necessarily always helping your body get a period back. So we really want to consider these things. I also want to note that sometimes when we are repleting you with food and you're eating more fat, you're eating more carbs, maybe your body's starting to cycle again. Maybe it's not yet, but like the writing's on the wall that it's probably going to. Sometimes we can get cholesterol levels that look elevated. And this is actually to be expected in some people. And again, sometimes the feedback is like, oh my gosh, eat healthier and exercise. And, if your physician's just not familiar with eating disorders or athletes and not helpful advice, right? So that can be a normal pattern that we see too, that should level out once you've been consistently getting enough for several months and years. So to kind of wrap this up, what I also want to have you consider is that this can take some time. There's not like a good predictability factor. I would say if you, again, you feel like you've been incorporating these things for a couple months and you're not having success, to definitely hire a sports dietitian if you're able. Myself and Erica would love to work with you. You can check out how at the link in the show notes. We do have one-on-one coaching available and group coaching as well. Um, and we can really help you nail down like, are you actually doing enough? What gaps do we need to fill? Lab work, etc. Maybe hiring a therapist if you're finding you're unable to implement a lot of these things, or if you're really struggling with body composition changes that can happen when you start to eat more, which is normal and sometimes necessary. Those things can be really important as well, in addition to potentially, if not your PCP, like an endocrinologist or sports medicine physician who can also take a look at this for you, your OBGYN. These things are all helpful resources, and this can take some time. Again, there's other kind of like ways to understand if your period is going to come, or if your period is coming, we want to see it be regular, which typically means between, I believe it's between 21 and 38 days is technically normal, but you don't want much variation month to month, more than like a couple days. The most common average menstrual cycle is 28 days long. And that ranges from the first day of your period to the last day before your next period. That's how like long a full cycle is. Bleeds can range quite a bit, whether you're bleeding for 2 days or maybe up to 7 or 8. That's all considered normal, but I would say it should be relatively consistent for you, like whatever your normal is. And I do see shorter bleeds, like just a couple days, often associated with lower hormone status, and heavier bleeds sometimes associated with like estrogen dominance or other medical conditions like endometriosis or fibroids. So there's a lot of things to consider. Once your period does come back, it's good to track it. You can also track symptoms to make sure you're ovulating. We do want to be ovulating when we're getting a period. You can absolutely have a period or just a bleed and not ovulate. And again, we want our body to be ovulating to be its healthiest, whether or not you want kids. If you want kids, you definitely want your body to be ovulating because that is a necessary part of the fertility process. And there's a lot of ways to measure this. You can be, super specific about it and use luteinizing hormone strips, which track when luteinizing hormone increases, which basically predicts that ovulation is likely to happen within the next like 48 hours or so. You can use like a fertility predictor kit, like a Nido, which confirms ovulation. You can track basal body temperature using like an app like Natural Cycles that basically tracks your body's temperature throughout the month. It will increase a little bit in your luteal phase during, and after ovulation. And that can be a sign that your body ovulated. You can also track cervical mucus, which is super easy. You just kind of, look at the underwear, and you can Google this. There's a lot of different like things to look for, but your cervical mucus is supposed to change a little bit throughout phases of your cycle to indicate when your fertility window is, when you're not fertile, and then obviously will be red when your period comes. So these things can also be like little signs throughout the month that like, hey, I think things are happening. You can also have increased libido at certain times of the month. You can have, more tender breasts like leading up to your period, more fatigue and poorer recovery within reason should be normal leading up to your period. And again, sometimes the body can take a minute to like remember how to do all of this. And that's to be said too, if you are coming off of hormonal birth control. If you haven't been having a period for however long and for whatever reason, your body typically isn't producing sex hormones, which means it's not going to produce, it's not going to have thickening of the endometrial lining in your uterus, because it's like, we can't have a human right now. So like, we're not going to, dedicate resources to this, which means nothing is there to shed, and nothing is there to have a period. When you ovulate and your egg does not get fertilized, and therefore you're not pregnant, that's also part of what sheds out during your period. Is that in the lining? The lining was supposed to thicken to welcome an egg if it was fertilized, have it implant, you become pregnant. If none of that's happening, you have nothing to bleed, right? So sometimes it can take a couple cycles for this endometrial lining to build back up, and you can be ovulating, but there's not much of an endometrial lining for you to have anywhere for the egg to go if you are wanting to get pregnant, or again, if you're not wanting to get pregnant, but you're noticing a little bit of a bleed and you're noticing it gets heavier each cycle, that can just be because your lining's thickening, which is a good sign. That's a good sign. Um, so this is getting kind of long, but those are kind of 5 of my tips if you're looking to get your period back. Again, if you are looking for extra resources, I do absolutely love working with clients on this, as does my co-dietitian Erica, and we would love to be a part of your team and help you out. So you can check out how to work with us at the link in the show notes. Happy running and happy fueling until next time.